In Chapter 10, we'll cover the topic of evolution, at least in part. There will be several chapters in this class that deal with evolution. We define evolution as a change in the characteristics of a population of organisms as you go from one generation to the next. In essence, we're talking about a change in the gene pool of a population as we go from one generation to the next. All the changes that are part of what we define as evolution are characteristics of organisms that are inherited via the genes. Other things may happen to an organism over the course of their lifetime, but these changes, these alterations in their phenotype, are not heritable. In other words, they can't be passed to their offspring, and so they are not part of this discussion of evolution. Evolution is the discussion of a population that changes over time as you go from one generation to the next. There are many examples of evolution in today's world, and so pesticide-resistant lice are one example of a little microcosm in which we see evolution. So, for instance, the boy depicted on the screen, on the left-hand side of the screen, we see him scratching his head with lots of lice in his hair, and we see both lice that are depicted as white and lice that are depicted as a darker orange color. Let's assume for the moment that the lice that are white are susceptible to some sort of insecticide that would be found in a shampoo that you would use to get rid of lice. The lice that are shown in yellow are resistant to that pesticide. So the boy, at the insistence of his parents, uses the insecticide shampoo. All of the light-colored, susceptible lice die, and on his head we're left with the resistant, dark-colored orange lice. These lice then reproduce, and so the population has changed as a result of the application of the pesticide. We see this many, many times in today's world. We see it in the case of the development of resistant bacteria. Bacteria are becoming resistant to antibiotics simply because when you use an antibiotic, all the bacteria that are sensitive to that antibiotic die. And the ones that happen to be resistant, the very small percentage that happen to be resistant, survive and reproduce and replace the population. We see it constantly in the application of pesticides in agriculture. It only takes a very small number of years before pests become resistant to pesticides. And so this is evolution on a relatively small scale, admittedly, but this is clearly an example of a population that is changing as it goes from one generation to the next. One thing that is important to note at this particular point is that populations, not individuals, evolve. And so in our lice example, the lice that were resistant survived, the ones that were not resistant died. So there was no single louse that changed in response to the application of the pesticide. Simply the ones that are resistant live, and everyone else does not. And